Blog Talk Radio.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Julie. Huh? Julie. Huh? Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Anybody? Anybody? Mike. Huh? What day is it, Mike? Huh? Woo-hoo! Leslie, guess what today is? Leslie, guess what today is?
It's hump day.
Hump day!
It's hump day.
Hump day!
Okay, this is Tom Donelson with the Donelson Files, and this there's the Wednesday edition is hump. When you hear that word, the hump, it means it's the hump of the week. So Wednesday. Now I'm going to do something a little different. First of all, I want to kind of pass on some news here. My partner Coco Konski, aunt just passed away, and in fact, it just happened very. Like almost before showtime. She's going to try to call in sometime in about 30 minutes. And so there are going to be aspects of the show we're going to save until she gets on. But I'm going to begin the show in this fashion. Okay. I have a very close friend of mine who he's very concerned about things, and she's a person of the left, as I'm of the right. And I'm going to make, and like I say, I'm not going to detail the aspects of the letters sent. But what it is, I'm going to take the first part of this conversation and kind of indirectly respond to certain things raised in the communication. All right. First and foremost, I didn't see anything today that would change my mind that this is an impeachable offense with the Ukraine situation. The star witness, which is William Taylor, admitted two very important things. The first thing that he admitted is that, quite frankly, he wasn't at the event, that this was something that was told to him by a second, third, or fourth party. In other words, he wasn't at the call. I would want people today to look at Jim Jordan questioning of Taylor. And you cannot walk away from this and not know he picked Taylor apart. He referenced Taylor's disposition. He confirmed that Taylor met Zelensky, the president, 3 times after the July call. By the way, this is all matter of public record. I'm not including the day after. Jordan proceeded to confirm that there were no funding linkage in any of those meetings investigating Joe and Hunter Biden. President Zelensky meets with you, Ambassador Volker and Ambassador Sondland. And again, according to your deposition, your testimony, there was no linkage to security of assisted dollars to the investigation of Burisma or the Bidens. The second meeting was August the 27th. President Zelensky meets with you. Ambassador Bolton knows. And again, no linkage to security assistant dollar to the investigation of the Bidens. Jordan continues. Then, of course, the third meeting was September 5th. President meets with you and Senators Johnston and Murphy, and once again, no linkage to the investigation of Burisma or the Bidens. 3 meetings and no linkage. Is that accurate? The response by Taylor, Mr. Jordan, is certainly accurate on the first 2 meetings because, to my knowledge, we're not aware of the hold of assistance until the 29th of August. Taylor responded. The third meeting you mentioned, there was a discussion of security system, but there was not a discussion of linkage. And then they surely would have brought, all right. Ambassador Taylor, you recalls that Mr. Morris told Ambassador Taylor, I told Mr. Morris I conveyed this message to Mr. Yermak September 1st, 2019, in connection to Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and to the meeting with President Zelensky. Reading out loud Sondland's statement. We have 6 people having 4 conversations in 1 sentence, and you just told me that you got a clear understanding, and you are the star witness. I'm going to repeat again exactly what Taylor stated to Jordan. Listen to the video tape carefully. At the first meeting, President Zelensky meets with you, Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Sondland, and again, according to your deposition and your testimony, there was no linkage of security assistance dollars to investigating Burisma or the Bidens. The second meeting, August 27th, President Zelensky meets with you, Ambassador Bolton, and others, and again, there's no linkage of security assistance dollar to the investigation of the Bidens. Then, of course, the third meeting was September 5th. President Zelensky meets with you, President Johnson, Senator Johnston, and Murphy, and again, no linkage of security. Now, he basically is quoting Taylor's own deposition. 3 meetings, President, and no linkage. Mr. Jordan is certainly accurate on the first 2 because, to my knowledge, we're not aware of the holdover assistance until the 29th of August. The third meeting that you mentioned, Senator Murphy and Senator Johnson, was a discussion of security assistance. Again, no discussion of linkage. Let that sink in just a little bit. Because I want people to understand what is truly at stake here. Because in the opening statement, Adam Schiff states clearly he did not know who the whistleblower is. Well, guess what? We already know who the whistleblower is. Everybody in Washington knows who the whistleblower is. This is nothing new. So this is kind of like, and we know that the whistleblower met with the staff of Adam Schiff. I mean, that too has been repeatedly. Now, okay. For example, I'm going to give you an article that was written. Adam Schiff coordinated the whistleblower complaint before filed with the Inspector General. This was an article on redstate.com. Very accurate article with detailed analysis. Not fake news, folks. Now, the point I'm going to make here is Adam Schiff's a liar. This is nothing new. And the question I will throw back to audience is this: okay, when you have the very person who's on an opening statement to the country tells a lie, which everybody knows who the whistleblower is. This is not a secret. We know he's a young man who had worked for the for Joe Biden, worked on the Ukrainian desk, was brought in by Lieutenant Colonel, brought in by McMaster when he was the national security chief. And the question that comes into play here is credibility. It would seem to me, if we're going to be credible and look at, let's say, compare Devin Nunes, who's been pretty much on target throughout the Russian collusion case, and Adam Schiff, well, who's been less than honest about all of this. And again, I want people to understand exactly the quote here. He was cross-examined. Taylor, throughout this, does not state he was present for the phone call, but heard it from other sources. He's in effect giving his opinion. 2, talks about the linkage aspect. And again, he admits that with his own conversation with Zelensky and with the Ukraine, that this never came up. This is your star witness, folks. This is the whole key. Because if you know, Adam Schiff is not bringing the whistleblower on for a reason. He would be literally massacred in a cross-examination. That's why he's not bringing Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin. Because as Brian York, a very good reporter, pointed out, there was a lot that he did not know, that he was not aware of, to be a good witness. In other words, the star witness is a person who wasn't at the phone call. Now, you can make your own decision because we have the transcript of the phone call. Okay? We have the transcript of the phone call. So, and the point I'm going to make here is this. What is far worse? And I'm going to leave this with the audience. And I'm going to leave this question with the audience. And when Coco comes up, I will ask her as well. What is far worse? A vice president goes with the approval of the president, tells the Ukrainian government, we're going to withhold $1 billion worth of aid if you, unless you fire the investigator who's investigating this natural gas company, which, by the way, happens to have his son on the board and who's getting paid. And he was fired. I quit, and there was a quote. In the case of the phone call, go back to the phone call. There are 3 aspects to the phone call that people tend to forget. First, Trump, which I will deal with a little bit later, discussing the fact that the Europeans themselves are not stepping up, a point that the Ukrainian president omits. He talks about crowd force. To those who don't know what the source of crowdsource was, it was dealing with the Russian collusion case, the hacking of the Democratic email, and the investigation that's presently going on into the origin of the Russian collusion. How did it get started? Under what guise? Of what reason and rationale did it get started? Because quite frankly, we now know there was no collusion between Trump and the Russians. But there may have been collusion with some Ukrainian politicians and the Clinton campaign. So if we're going to play the collusion game, there it is. That's not a conspiratorial theory. These are things that even the Ukrainian government themselves, the Ukrainian courts have acknowledged. Ukrainian meddling in our election. That's not a debatable point, folks. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. But here's the question I'm going to throw back. Which is worse? What Trump is being accused of? And essentially, here's what's Trump being accused. A phone call that says the following. A, the Europeans aren't doing that. B, can you help out with some investigation we're now presently doing in the U.S.? Countries do that all the time. 3, it's really bad what the Biden did. Hinting maybe you should investigate the Bidens. Did it step over the line? And here's the fact. They got their weapons. They got their assistance. It wasn't denied, it was delayed. Eventually, they got it. Now, let's contrast, and that's a fact that is there as well. Let me contrast 2 things. Let me contrast number 1. In the Obama administration, the weapons, they didn't sell the kind of weapons, defensive weapons needed to defend themselves against the Russians. The Trump administration did. They had already received their first shipment of that before this phone call. Now, if you want to make the case that Donald Trump was asking for an investigation, help, let's say, in an investigation dealing with the origin, that happens all the time. Number two, was he right to look at the Bidens? Remember, Joe Biden is on videotape bragging that he indeed told the Ukrainians, if you don't fire this investigator, we're going to deny you the money. And he basically said they were fired, and he said he had the backing of the Obama administration. The videotape doesn't lie. Which is worse? Because in effect, to my friend, is basically being impeached for finding out the real truth behind the 2016 election. We're going to take a quick break. This is Tom Donelson on the Donelson Files. We will return on the Donelson. Let me start this all over again. This is Tom Donelson, the Donelson Files on the Bachelor News Radio Network.
Hey, this is L.A. Bachelor reminding you, if you're looking for real discussion on sports, politics, religion, and other topics, you need to join us on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern at WCOMFM.org, on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. at blogtalkradio.com/LA-Bachelor, and on Thursdays at the same web address. Follow us on Facebook at Pad Nation, on Twitter, Pad Nation, the number 2 at Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can email us with your requests, your comments, your concerns, anything you want at our email address at LABachelor with a T, BATCHELOR 40 at gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Pad Nation, Instagram, and of course, if you miss any part of our broadcast, make sure you go to thebachelorpadnetwork.com and listen and enjoy the Bachelor Pad.
Now, I'm going to go to the second part. There's another part that's more of a generalized, but I feel that needs to be discussed. And it comes down to this. She makes the point that she talks about that she believes in theories and attributes toward the empathy for humanity. I do not tolerate those who willingly seek harm others by furthering their own interest. Okay? You know what? I agree with that. And I guess the question I would throw back is, I'm going to put it in this way. I wrote a book on national populism and democratic socialism. I'm going to put it this way. The Rise of National Populism and Democratic Socialism, What Our Response Should Be. I wrote this book in 2017. I'm going to make this. I've been pretty well accurate in that book today of the forces that are cutting across not just the United States, but Europe. And I would look at Trump in a totally different. It was like last night we had this discussion. And one of the points I made, I said, we sometimes need to divorce the reality of what has happened from the man. What actually is happening? What is going on? And maybe a question I'm going to throw back in this way. I would say that I spent a good part. I started on the left. The first person I elected was that I voted for was George McGovern. The second election, I voted for Jimmy Carter. I used to always say, I remember once getting in a conversation with my wife when I made the observation, well, I at least got a do-over in the case of Jimmy Carter. I got to vote for Ronald Reagan. And her response was to me, well, I got the 1976 election right the first time. Now, here's the point that I want to kind of leave here with empathy in. Because I'm going to make several points. one of the things we've had discussions on our show with people like Lauren Bies, who is a very smart woman, has 4 college degrees and has a very high IQ, and she's a woman who's was raised as a Republican, has moved, my view to the left. And the question I've always thrown back is this: how do you handle? It's like Trump got the blame for the conditions that had been going on for decades. When he went to Congress, he said, "Okay, we need to do something. Let's build some more facility." But he also made a point that one way is to stop the flow of illegal immigrants, so we are not put into a position where we're detaining people in buildings that that numbers far exceed what the building was meant to hold. This didn't start with Trump, but he at least was looking at ideas to do something about it. He even proposed, steps to make those things better. And that, too, is a matter of public record. There was at least 17 different times that Democrats opposed any effort to deal with those conditions. But I'm going to take this even a step further, because let's put it in this capacity. Countries are not countries without borders. We put in 1 million people a year legally. 90% of those people are people of color. 38% of all legal immigrants are Asians. 34% Hispanics. I'm thinking 13% is black, and the rest are white. That's about 90%. And there's very little, if you look at the proposal, the merit system that that Trump has proposed, which, by the way, every other countries have done. Canada does this. Great Britain does this. Australia does this. A merit system. Again, if you look at the experience of those countries, the majority of people be coming in will be people of color. That's not a debatable point. There are facts that are there to support that. No one has ever suggested that we quit bringing in legal immigrants. The best we've seen is people debating, should we have 500,000 and slow down the immigration while those immigrants in the United States today are allowed to assimilate. Logical, and certainly has been a logical step. Others say, let's keep the numbers the same. You ask the American people, they're divided on that. I know, I've done the surveys. But the bottom line is we're bringing in 1 million people a year. And there's very few voices on the right or the left, or even within the Trump administration, that says we're going to stop legal immigration. Just changed how it's done. It's very similar to what other countries have been doing for decades. I would take it in another step on the economic side. And I guess we'll get into this question a little bit later, when Coco comes in, because I would like to get some of her thoughts on some of this. Maybe the point I want to make to you is this. Being conservative is being empathetic. Far more so than I would say than some of the liberal ideas. I would take my ideas and contrast those to what's being proposed by the Democratic Party. Here's the bottom line. What you're seeing from Bernie Sanders and from Elizabeth Warren and in part from Joe Biden and from others campaigning is a proposal that, quite frankly, is far beyond anything a Nordic capitalists are presently doing. How many people are aware of the fact that in the Nordic capitalist societies of Sweden, Denmark, you're looking at tax rates 40 to about 52%, 55%. That's your top rate. And the United States is 37%, but if you live in California, You live in, you live in California, you live in New York, you're already paying those top rates. The average rich person in this country is in effect paying close to those rates. Close to those rates that the Scandinavian people are paying. For years, our corporate tax rate was much higher. The most recent corporate tax cuts have now put us within the range of what these Nordic states have done. Where the Nordic states have, what they do have done to support their more extensive welfare state, their safety net, is they tax the middle class. It's a regressive tax collection system. Much of Europe is like this. To pay for these benefits, the middle class pays. They pay a significant higher payroll tax, a VAT tax, which is essentially a sales tax. Now, in other words, if you want these increased benefits, you're going to have to pay. The only honest politician on this has been Bernie Sanders, who's already stated you're going to pay 4% more on this. In other words, you are going to pay a substantial higher than what you're paying right now. Elizabeth Warren has just been dishonest enough and smart enough in her own mind not to admit the obvious. To get these benefits, you have to pay for them. I can tell you right now, between what's been proposed by Bernie Sanders and what's been proposed by Democrats dealing with Social Security, the payroll tax will go up close to 7% points over what you are paying right now. That means you're going to be paying 21%. That's not a debatable point, folks. These are actual proposals. Now, let's talk about some of the other 70% tax rates. Now, I did a report on this, and I demonstrated very clearly when we had a 90% tax rate in the 1950s. How many people were aware of the fact we had 4 recessions? We had 4 recessions from 1949 to 1960. 4. That means a recession every 3 years. In the 1970s, we had 3 recessions from 1969 to 1981, which was a very severe recession. When we lowered the marginal tax rates, you know how many recessions we've had since 1983? We had a severe one in 2007, 2009. We had a mild one in 2001. We had a second mild one in 1990, 1999. In other words, we had 3 recessions from 1983 to the present. Over nearly 4 decades, we were having 1 recession per decade. When we had the marginal tax rates between 39% and 28 to 39%. Now, if you can explain to me why putting the tax rates and having slower economic growth overall is a good idea, I'd like to hear it. We're going to take a quick break. This is Tom Donelson on the Donelson Files on the Bachelor News Radio Network. Just to let you know, we're still waiting for Coco. Her aunt just passed away, so but she did say she'll try to get a call in and sometime in the next 10 minutes. But we'll see.
If you want to hear another view of the latest developments in Trump's Washington, listen to the Dr. Larry Show. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Larry is a former businessman, entrepreneur, college president, and author who provides background and context for current events and trends in politics, education, foreign policy, and religion from a conservative perspective. Tune in and hear the other side as Dr. Larry talks with Washington insiders exclusively on blogtalkradio.com and the podcast at thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
Yes, the Bachelor News Radio Network. Dr. Larry follows our show every Wednesday. He also follows our show Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 4 a.m. in the morning and at 11 a.m. during the drive time. Every day on the Bachelor News Radio Network, you can go to the bachelorpadnetwork.com. And there you can see the Bachelor News Show, the Donelson Files, the Dr. Larry Show, Locker Talk, Sandy's Secrets, and so on. Now, I'm going to put it in the, okay, I've just made the point here, and I wanted to kind of continue on this. I'm going to say to you very clearly that you can make the argument that we've had slow economic growth throughout this century. That I'm not going to disagree with. And I do think there's been some issues. We've had the Dr. Larry Show talk about some of this and the inequality as a result and what to do about it. We've had, LA Bachelor talk about this, and we've had others. Yeah, and I get it. And I would say this. We did have slow growth following the 2007-2009 recession. And part of the reasons is we moved away from those economic policies that worked in the 1980s and 90s. Very simply put. And I'll let people decide themselves. Let's compare the Reagan years and going on into the Clinton years. Let's compare to, let's say, what we have right now. Since 2001, we've had 2 years, only 2 years in which we have more than 3% growth. 2 years. Now, that's 2 years. Now, that's not good enough, and we shouldn't be satisfied with that. I would agree 100% with that thesis. In the 1980s, we had double the economic growth and substantial increase. But here's the key element in all of this. The key element that we need to remember in all of this is to me, the key element. In the 1980s, most every major demographic group saw improvement in their income. And this continued through the 90s. While Bill Clinton did raise the income tax rate to a high level of 39%, he lowered the capital gains tax. He also put a substantial control in spending. You can make the case that he's doing a better job, did a fairly good job of that. In other words, he followed essentially a centrist Democratic policy. He didn't go to the left, he went to the center. Whereas he once stated, we are the Eisenhower Republicans. He once told a group of his associates that. But and he also was at a period of time of the tech boom that benefited as well. But the bottom line that comes into play is this. We had 2 decades with 3 presidents and different parties controlling an economic growth and prosperity with but maybe one recession. That's an economic record that's more than envious. We should be envious, but it's something even deeper. People saw their lives get better. Now, number 2, point I'm going to make is the Trump. To me, the disadvantage of the one problem with the Trump economic plan is the uncertainty. We did this a while back, a study. When you have uncertainty, it does affect how businesses think. Part of it is due to the possible trade war with China, trade disputes with Europe. But interesting enough, we're starting to see a logjam be reduced. I had a conversation this morning with my financial planner, and she made a point. She says, Europe is starting to see a little recovery. If we can get the China trade deal done, and the North American trade agreement essentially has been redone, that would be beneficial over the long run. In other words, the most protectionist president elected may in fact be the most free market trade elected. And in the process, we have seen increased economic growth. And the biggest benefactor of this growth have been blacks and Hispanics. Have seen their income go up, and they've seen their unemployment rates go to record lows. There are more Hispanics working today than ever. Ever. What I would say to my friend is very simple. It is far more empathetic to produce opportunities for people to move up the economic ladder. That is the best thing we can do. And these are the policies that are being pursued. Yes, there are disagreements I would have with the Trump administration on things. But in the final analysis, there are problems that he inherited throughout the world, including the problems at the border. At least I would be remiss to talk about Denmark and Sweden. How many people, right now, Denmark recently closed their borders to Sweden. They basically said, no way, but Sweden, because of gangs coming from Sweden and having violence into Denmark. The prime minister, who, by the way, is a woman of the left, got elected on a platform that essentially said no more immigrants, and even talked about the idea of shipping some of the immigrants that came into that country out. In other words, this woman ran to the far right of anything Trump has ever proposed on immigration reform or immigration period. I guess maybe the question I would throw back to my friend is this. Donald Trump did get the first phase of prison reform enacted. He's been committed. He is now committed to that process. A deal could be done on immigration reform. That would include treatment of those who are here, while at the same time restricting illegal immigration and strengthening legal immigration. The plans are already there. There's nothing unempathetic about that. You have an economic plan that's growing, and you have a president who, for the first time, has basically made it clear he wants not to start new wars, but to see if we can extract ourselves from the wars we have. We have the most pacifist president elected. I think we need to be looking at what the results of policy as opposed to what sometimes gets said in the political arena. Is an improvement. Trump's economy is an improvement over the Obama economy, but it could still be better. We need to be reaching a point of 3 to 4%, if not higher, as we got in the Reagan years and as we got in the Clinton years. But let me add one last point here, and I will throw why this election matters. You look on the Democratic side, as I started, The Democratic Party today is to the left of Nordic capitalist society. Think about it. They have a 70 to 90% tax rate. Elizabeth Warren has proposed a wealth tax far in excess anything that Europe would have done, has ever tried, and more. And by the way, 80% of European countries that tried this idea that Elizabeth Warren is pushing walked away from it because it didn't produce the revenues and it didn't have the positive impact on the economy or, in that matter, inequality. If you look at the states today, California probably has more inequality and more poverty than any other state in the union. And it essentially is a state run with high taxes, high regulation, everything the liberal mind tells us we need to do, and you have you have more poverty, more inequality. Is this the model you want? If you look at the energy plan, we're talking eliminating whole industries. The fossil fuel industry, the nuclear industry. If you truly think we're going to survive on wind and solar, I got news for you. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. This is Tom Donelson with the Donelson Files on the Bachelor News Radio Network. And every Wednesday, we're followed by the Dr. Larry Show. And every Tuesday, followed by the Bachelor Pad. Plus, we're on 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Bachelor News Radio Network and 10 a.m. Monday through Friday.
Join Barry Barnes for Locker Talk on the Bachelor Pad Network as he presents NFL news and evaluates players. Fridays at 9 a.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com.
Yes. Yeah, this is a Donelson Paz. Don't forget Locker Talk on the Bachelor News Radio Network. You can hear that 9 a.m. on this network, and you can go to the Bachelor News Radio Network, bachelorpadnetwork.com, and Locker Talk is right there, so you can listen to it. So, absolutely. Yeah. So, like I said, as I was going to say, let me summarize it in this way. Empathy is more. If you ask the question why I became a conservative, it was very simple. My dad was a conservative, and he was an executive for a company. He moved up into the ranks to become an executive of a company. But I knew the kind of man he was and the kind of people he worked with. I even worked in that company and retired from the company that he was with. What I saw was a totally different system. But what I saw was a company that produced goods and services that helped people, run by good people, quality people. Then I saw what small businesses were going through, and I saw the results of liberal policies. I had a chance to be a student. In my teaching days, I had a chance to be a teacher. I was a substitute, and I saw firsthand the problems that we would see in education later. Maybe the point I saw was this. I saw wealth and prosperity and growth. Last night we had a conversation about progress and about growth and about ideas and energy production. We started with energy production. I made the point that the problem we run into with energy production and the discussion is this. How often, when people say to me things like, oil, fossil fuels are finite, and I got into this conversation on Twitter, exponential growth and finite, and when we're going to eventually run out. And my answer was, I have no clue. I know this. We got far more than what you're saying we have. Why is that? I stated that every generation, we were told we were running out of fuel, fossil fuel, only to find 20 years later we found far more than what was predicted. If you look back in the 1990s and say, here's what we're going to be producing today here in the United States, they would not believe it. It would be far in excess of what was predicted. I talk about the fact that in our cell phone, what we hold in our cell phone is the power that is reserved that essentially a building of computers that is about more powerful than some of the computers that were used that got us to the moon. We don't know what the future is going to bring, and I said the number one thing and the most empathetic thing that you could ever do in a society is liberate the most important resource you have, the human mind and human ingenuity. Socialism doesn't do that. They do the complete opposite. They control the human mind. They don't liberate it, they control it. They control human ingenuity. And as a result, you get poverty. You get Venezuela. Even the Nordic countries that these liberal Democrats claim to model themselves after. Understand, you have to have a functioning capitalist society to make your welfare system work. We're not having a debate over to what extent we should have a safety net. We're having a debate of transforming America in its totality. And there's nothing empathetic about their plan. In California, you got brownouts that affects millions of people. On a day, just recently, 2 or 3 million people lost their power. That's not being empathetic. That's produced, and a good portion of this is due to the energy policy put together by those politicians. The same politicians that put together policies that have doubled the gas prices in California, something you don't see anywhere else. You know, Coco would be happy to tell you that one of the reasons why she uses Uber because she can't, because it's costing $5 a gallon of gas. It cost me today $2.25. I filled up and it cost me $2.25. Where's the empathy when you design a energy plan that increases the cost purposely? And then when people complain, you go blame somebody else instead of blaming the policy that you put on. As I stated, and if you look at the writings of Joe Cockton, who, by the way, is a Democrat, but a centrist Democrat, who's written about California, and he'll make and the data he produces the same data that I've just quoted. Namely, California has the highest, has greater inequality than probably any other state in the union. They have more as a percentage of people based on the Census Bureau supplemental. Now, I use the word the supplemental measures that they use, which includes the price of gas, price of housing, and so on. They got the highest poverty rate based on using those supplemental standards. There's nothing empathetic about those policies. And that's why I became a conservative. And if you want to know, and I'll go back to the point we started earlier today. And I do want to make a mention that Coco's aunt has passed away. This happened shortly. In fact, it happened about she got the news 5 minutes before showtime. So we will, and it's looking like she's not going to be able to call in. But I want to make 3 points, make a point is this. There's no conspiracy when you say the following is not a conspiracy theory. In the Ukraine, Joe Biden did, in fact, pressure the government to stop an investigation that involved his son. Donald Trump made that mention on a phone call. Now, in the phone call, there is no quid pro quo. Whether there was some behind the scene that people are claiming, that's a different story. But I already quoted you the actual exchange between Jim Jordan, who basically laid waste to the star witness when he all but stated, in the meetings I had, it didn't come up. 3 meetings didn't come up. They eventually got their assistance. And the systems that have been provided for the Ukraine was far in excess anything provided when Joe Biden was the vice president of the previous administration. If we basically impeach presidents for quid pro quo, we're going to be impeaching a whole lot of presidents in the future. In 2012, Barack Obama, on tape, on a hot mic, told the Russian then Prime Minister to tell his friend Putin, don't worry, we'll deal with these issues of SDI and other issues after the election. Let me just get through the election. Was there a quid pro quo? Well, the Russians eventually got what they wanted because the strategic defensive weapons that were put in Poland, for example, were withdrawn by Obama. Was there a quid pro quo? Certainly, if you want to make the argument, did impeach Barack Obama based on that? I wouldn't. Any more than I would impeach the president on this. There's no conspiracy theories here. Here's what we do know for a fact. We know right now there's an investigation going on dealing with the origin, including potential abuse of the vice courts. We don't have to dispute anymore whether or not Trump was spied on. He was. The only question is how did those warrants become legal or illegal? And some of the leakings so far would indicate that if the Inspector General report that's due to come out sometime at the end of this month, early December, may in fact have criminal references, which, by the way, the same IG Inspector General had already made that recommendation on James Comey. The only difference is, Bill Barr decided at that time not to prosecute. But it wasn't because he was innocent. Here's what we know from the Inspector General. Go read the report. I did. Comey and the FBI pretty much tanked the Clinton investigation. They pretty much let her off the hook, even though they themselves, in their own admission, stated she broke the law. She just, the way they put it, didn't mean to do so. Now, whether or not there was interference on the top, that's a different story. That's a different debate. That's a different debate. What's not, but that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. I've read the report. And these vice courts violations, we're talking massive violations of civil liberties. I'm the same guy who basically stated there was no collusion on Russia with Trump, and we wouldn't find that. Guess what? I was right. I was right to talk about the visa courts, and those are now being investigated. That's not a conspiracy theory. Those are facts that can be documented. They're out there. Just go look. Go look. And if you ask the question in this way, why I will vote for Donald Trump is not because, is it because he's a wonderful humanitarian? I think you can make a good case. He's not the most humanitarian guy out there. But I look at the other side. I look at a 70-90% tax rate on an attack on the wealthy, and an attack on those people who produce the wealth, and who produce the ideas for the wealth. Elizabeth Warren's been influenced by a guy named Tom Piketty, a French economist, a Marxist. If you're being influenced by Marxists, you're already on the wrong path in your economic theory. I look at where their theories is headed. I wrote an entire book, which I documented. And I've been proven to be far more correct in my assessment than many of the analysis you can see outside of this network. I'll take my record up against anybody. And I'm in the top 10%, folks. I'm going to say that. I'm in the top 10%. I got 40 years of political experience. I've been an author and part of 35, 40 different studies. And I would put it in this way. I would challenge anybody to listen to the Jim Jordan Taylor exchange. Decide for yourself whether decide whether or not a case has been made for impeaching President Trump. I think it's self-evident. I've read you the transcripts. The transcripts are clear. Go look at the video. It's clear. I'm not defending conspiracies. I'm defending facts. And when I talk about empathy, when people say to me, empathy, I say to you, how empathetic in California is it when you set up policy that makes it virtually impossible for a middle class to buy a house, when you're paying $5 a gallon of gas, when you got some of the highest utilities in the country, and you got the very poor and those trying to move up the economic ladder having that ladder kicked out because they can't even afford a basic place to live. And before we get on the air here, I'm going to have my good friend, Dr. Larry. Dr. Larry, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Tom?
Well, what do you think? I don't know how much you heard, but my analysis of the Jim Jordan Taylor exchange. I don't know if you had a chance to see that or not. What's your thoughts so far of the first day of the impeachment?
Well, I thought Congressman Turner really called it. He said, here we are. First of all, he asked both of the witnesses whether they had ever had any direct contact with the president, and they both said no, they'd never even been in the same room with him. So he said, well, here we are talking about the impeachment of a president and removal from office, and we're talking to two people, and you're the lead witnesses in that investigation, and we're talking to the two lead witnesses who never had any contact with the president and don't know any, therefore have no firsthand information of anything. And so, therefore, it sounds to me like we're in a very, that the Democrats have a very shaky case because there's no evidence at all that you can give us. And that was absolutely true. Everything was hearsay.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to hold you to this point real quickly because this is Tom Donelson of Donelson Files. I just wanted to again say Coco Konsky could not join us tonight because her aunt just passed away. She just found out about 5 minutes before showtime. And she was going to try to call in at the hospital, but obviously she did not. So I just wanted to kind of let that know. And I'm going to basically, tell you what, Dr. Larry, we're getting ready to start your show, but I would like to have your permission before you bring your guest on to kind of follow up for a couple extra minutes, if you would let me do that.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
When you hear that trumpet, you know it's the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network, and I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, your host for the next hour. We're talking tonight about all of the impeachment news, and we're going to start off with a couple of comments from Tom Donelson, who some of you have heard for the last hour. Tom, go ahead.
Here's the point, because it really got me, because I had a good friend of mine write to me and believe in conspiratorial theory, and she based, obviously she didn't see the same exchange I did with Jim Jordan and Taylor. I thought Jordan nailed him, much in the same way you talk about Turner nailing him. And the other point too is, who was the person who asked the question, do you think these are impeachable offenses of Kent and Taylor? I know that question was asked by one of the Republicans, and they basically wouldn't answer the question.
Yeah, well, I think that was Radcliffe, and they didn't say anything. So he said, "Well, I withdraw the question," and then Schiff comes in and says, "Go ahead and answer it." No, they had a little skirmish.
So in effect, they're not prepared to say the obvious. No. Since they're being coached by Schiff. So, here's the bottom line. Your two-star witnesses weren't even there. They're giving their opinion is what they're doing. We're impeaching a president on their opinion. And I'll leave this one lesson, then I'll let you get to your guest. And I'm going to apologize, but thank you, is this. To me, I don't know if there's a gentleman by the name of Dave Goldman. Spengler is what he goes by in PJ Media. And he wrote a very fascinating piece. He said, you know what? We shouldn't be apologizing for the fact that Donald Trump wanted to investigate Joe Biden and investigate the origin of the 2016. Because if there was a national interest, that certainly is it. And I'll leave I left my audience, and I'll leave your audience this question. I'll let you and your guest, ponder this question: which is far worse? A president who says, "I want to get to the bottom of any corruption," and at the same time figure out whether or not a gentleman running for president acted in violation of law, or at least used his position of power to enhance his family portfolio, or a vice president who's running for president and with the cooperation of the previous president basically tells a government, you will fire this investigator who's investigating this company that my son's making money off. Which is worse?
Well, we'll leave that answer to our audience, and thank you, Tom, for starting us off. I do want to talk about that whole episode that we had today in the House of Representatives, but first I want to talk about a more general topic, and that is, will Donald Trump win in November of 2020? And I'm thinking, don't be too sure. The general opinion among Trump supporters and many Democrats is that a sitting president who oversees a thriving economy is very difficult to beat in an election for his second term. There is plenty of precedence for this prediction. Only two presidents since World War II have been defeated for a second term: Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush. Carter faced a serious recession, and Bush shared the vote with a third-party candidate. Ross Perot. So history is definitely on the side of this opinion, and many Trump supporters believe that his re-election is virtually assured. In my opinion, this is a potentially dangerous presumption. There are three unique factors which pose challenges to the president. The first is the, quote, anybody but Trump cabal. The Democrats are apparently convinced that this element is important enough that they are banking their entire strategy on it. And I wrote a column about that last week on which is available at the website drlarryonline.com. This belief is based on some evidence, although it is highly uncertain whether this distrust is universal enough to throw the election to any of the current candidates for the Democratic nomination. Of course, there is a new face on the horizon, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And now we have Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts. While Bloomberg has the financial means to pay for his own campaign, he starts off with several handicaps. First, he is not widely known as a politician outside New York. While he owns a television network which bears his name, unlike Donald Trump, he has not often appeared as a television personality. More likely, his reputation as, quote, the nanny mayor will be hard to sell to the young and independent voters who are a major group of swing voters. Finally, at nearly 78 years of age, he joins a geriatric roster of current candidates, including Biden and Warren, not to mention Trump himself. It is not clear that there's room for one more. As the origin and strength of the Never Trump bloc, it appears to be composed of several types of voters, with differing levels of intensity. The first and most persistent of the Trump haters is the, quote, establishment, consisting of the press, who have very effectively created a mythological stereotype of Donald Trump as a racist, white power advocate, dictator, and homophobe, among other unsavory attributes. The second is the political class of both parties, who, for both ideological and mercenary motives, reject every aspect of the Trump agenda, especially drain the swamp, because they are the swamp. Another part of the swamp is the bureaucracy, who are losing their power in various ways, including the intelligence community, which has lost control of foreign affairs, the military, which is losing all its wars, and the civilian agencies, which are facing monumental deregulation. There is another group that has bought into the malicious profile of Trump as a menace to minority Americans, especially black and Hispanics, although his record in this office has begun to penetrate both contingents. Finally, there are those who were simply put off by Trump's language and personality. This group was thought to include many women, although this bias has also been penetrated in many cases by his record in office. For those who lean left to begin with, Trump's personality and style justify their bias. The recent sweep of both houses of the Virginia legislature has been widely interpreted as due to the rejection of Trump by suburbia. That may have been the woman vote, but there are other factors as well, including the massive gifts to the Democrats by George Soros and Michael Bloomberg, close to $1 billion, actually. Nevertheless, Donald Trump must take these groups seriously. The most direct way to overcome these obstacles seems to be Trump's undoubted ability as a retail politician. Two of his major assets are his record and his charismatic stump appeal. For his supporters, his ability to draw and entertain his huge audiences during his rallies is most remarkable. The only politician who even came close to the Trump rallies might be Bobby Kennedy in the last days of his 1968 campaign, but even that competition pales in comparison to Trump's ability to repeat that performance again and again and again. It is important for his campaign to have, in addition, a vigorous ground game and a media presence to influence the voters who are not in the rallies. In addition, Trump has perhaps the chance of a lifetime to woo away from the Democrats the minority blocks of black and Hispanic voters. Both communities have large contingents of family-loving, hard-working, church-going, patriotic, military active duty and veterans, and a rising number of entrepreneurs. During the 2016 Republican convention, former Republican governor of New Mexico, Susana Martinez, summed up this thought when she said to her husband as they walked out of a Republican recruitment meeting years ago, "Damn, I guess we are Republicans," and very successful ones at that. To his credit, President Trump has started reaching out to both communities, as shown, for example, by his visit to a black assembly in Atlanta, Georgia last week. On my radio program, I asked longtime Republican Congressman Bob Livingston, "How did you get 90% of the African American vote during your campaigns in Louisiana?" "Simple," he said. "You have to talk to them and listen to them. And remember the words of another Republican, Theodore Roosevelt. People don't care about what you know until they know how much you care." And that is good advice for all Republicans. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Radio Network.
Join Barry Barnes for Locker Talk on the Bachelor Pad Network as he presents NFL news and evaluates players. Fridays at 9 a.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Radio Network. I'd like to welcome to the program tonight Dr. David Rare, who is has been a guest of ours before and who is a very astute observer of the Washington political scene. And welcome, David. So, well, hello.
Larry?
Yes.
It's David. Thanks for having me on, and it's great to be back with you.
Well, could we start off with you telling the folks a little bit about your own background, David? It's amazingly diverse.
Yeah. So I come from the Midwest. Came to Washington a long time ago. I was a professional lobbyist for over 25 years, working for the small business people through the National Federation of Independent Business, the beer wholesalers that always catches people's attention, who are great family-owned businesses around the country distributing beer from breweries to restaurants and retail operations, and then most recently was president of the National Association of Broadcasters until I jumped ship and became an academic. I have a PhD in economics, and now I teach at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, which is located about 5 minutes from downtown D.C.
Well, and you skip the fact that you're a nationally known expert on the whole issue of influence and legislation.
Right. I don't want to break my arm too much, but I like to be involved in positively changing America for the better.
So, what's your take on the commentary that I just gave?
Well, I think being cautiously optimistic is a good thing. One, we can't take anything for granted with President Trump's reelection because the Democrats, at least in Washington, D.C., will do anything to destroy him, not just to defeat him, but to destroy him. Hence the so-called impeachment process that we're going through now. They want to take a man who's really grown the American economy or who's helped grow the American economy over the last 3 years, which is now the greatest job creator in the history of the world. More people are employed than ever before. More groups, Hispanics, African Americans are working than ever before.
And
women, traditional Democratic voting blocs, and turn them against the president. So they can't get him on the economy, so they're now looking for other places, Russia, Ukraine, every country in the world we can think of, and his missteps, and try to turn that into a negative for him. That's the only way they beat him. And have a fairly good candidate. We're still seeing their candidates kind of move up and down the popularity of the American people. So we have to be cautious. I live in Virginia. We just had our Virginia Commonwealth elections, and the Republican Senate flipped to the Democrats. The Republican House flipped to the Democrats. A lot of people blame Trump. I think it was more complicated than that. But for those people who are interested in an America where there's great opportunity and that we continue to be kind of the shining light on this in the city on the hill, they have to be engaged in the electoral process and make sure they turn out and vote.
Well, what do you think of the there's a lot of things to talk about tonight. One of which is we now have two outriders that are are going to get into the Democrat race for the nomination. What's your opinion of the field so far?
Well, I think the new entrance of Michael Bloomberg and Patrick Duvall, the former governor of Massachusetts, indicates to me that a lot of people think the field is weak. If there was a strong candidate who was emerging as a front runner, they wouldn't get in the race. So I think they're very worried that all the national polls tell us that former Vice President Joe Biden's ahead. Maybe he's slipped into second position. But they're worried that if he wins the nomination or doesn't win the nomination and implodes, who's going to be the second in command? Most Democrats, activist Democrats, don't want the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. She is far outside the Democratic Party. She may be well-intentioned, but some of her policy implications, like taking away private health insurance from 185 million Americans, won't sell. And she will be dramatically defeated by Trump in the election if it's her, let alone the fact that having a new program for health care in America is going to cost something like $55 billion, which means if you think you're paying a lot in tax now, double it, triple it, maybe quadruple it just for health care costs.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's a winner. Yeah.
And actually, the economists are telling us, your fellow economists are telling us that 55 trillion, I'll get there, is pretty conservative. It's probably more like 100 trillion.
Right.
And then plus all the jobs that would be lost, and
and the disruption to the economy. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then you have people like me who are lobbyists who are never going to let that plan be put into place. They're going to protect their special interest folks and work to keep sure that their own interests are protected with any new plan, which is going to make it further complicate the situation.
And I should probably tell the audience that you and I are working on an alternative of trying to get some attention to a free market approach to health care, which we're hopeful we can get some support in the Republican side, mainly because the Democrats are all stuck on this one payer situation.
Right.
So if people want to hear some of the case for that, David is one of 4 podcasts that we have on YouTube under the subject line of Dr. Larry Welcomes, and we have people. We have a eminent representative of the medical profession itself, as well as another a couple of experts that were that are really scholars of this whole thing, and then David, and then we also have somebody from the insurance industry. So if anybody's interested in getting a pretty thorough briefing, we have some of the equipment for you.
Yeah.
So
and let me just say, Larry, the great opportunity here is we can't continue to move down the direction of having more government interference in effect in healthcare, because it doesn't seem to solve the problems we face. We have to think of really a new way to look at the problem and to solve it. And the unfortunate thing is when you go down the road of having too much government interaction, you can't get rid of the bad stuff that doesn't work, because the government process doesn't really allow us to get rid of it. It just builds a bureaucracy and interest groups who are all benefiting from it, and they fight like heck to protect it.
Well, that we will pick up this topic when we're not quite ready to make our case yet, but we're working on it, and
right.
Within the foreseeable future, we expect to have a product. So let's talk a little bit about the big event of the day, which was the testimony of William Taylor and George Kent in front of the House Intelligence Committee today, and it was really for a long time it was kind of hard to keep awake. But
I mean, it's not. I don't think it had quite the. Everyone inside Washington D.C. is all on a tither. We've got Trump. We've got Trump. We've got Trump. But if you really look at what was being said, that was 2 men who had worked in government, who didn't like the fact that the president didn't listen to them and went around them and created his own Ukrainian policy, which he thought was best. And I think their reaction was, "How dare he? We're the experts. You know, we're the only ones who know," and it really reflects a kind of elitism that we have in Washington, D.C. in this current day, that only experts can pronounce policy on things that affect all Americans. And I think it's wrong. I think your average American knows right from wrong and can make good decisions about things. And I think what Trump has done with his kind of disruptive attitude, whether you like him or you don't like him, is he's challenging people to do the best they can on behalf of the American people. And that's going to ruffle some feathers, and I think the strong economy with the disruption has caused this kind of whole procedure, which I think is, I mean, who is the last man in the Congress that had secret hearings, that accused people of doing things wrong, and then only would leak things that favored their side and really destroyed people's lives? It was Joe McCarthy. And
Mueller.
Yeah, Mueller too, but if we go back, Joe McCarthy was one that was accusing everybody, and that was kind of a bad time in America, and let's not go back to that again. We've lived that lesson. Let's move on and just stick with facts.
Well, hold that thought, and you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Radio Network.
Hey, this is LA Bachelor reminding you if you're looking for real discussion on sports, politics, religion, and other topics, you need to join us on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern at WCOMFM.org, on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. at blogtalkradio.com/LA-Bachelor, and on Thursdays at the same web address. Follow us on Facebook at Pad Nation, on Twitter, Pad Nation, the number 2 at Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can email us with your requests, your comments, your concerns, anything you want at our email address at LABachelor with a T, BATCHELOR 40 at gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Pad Nation Instagram. And of course, if you miss any part of our broadcast, make sure you go to thebachelorpadnetwork.com and listen and enjoy the Bachelor Pad.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Radio Network, and we're talking to Dr. David Rare, who's a professor now and has an extensive background in Washington, and comes at it from a little different view than, or different perch than I had. I was a contractor, and so I knew the government from the point of results, and I was forever disillusioned. But we're talking about the witnesses and the questioning that occurred in this hearing today. The thing that really stood out to me, and it seemed like every time that the Republicans, particularly the Jordan, Nunes to begin with, and then Jordan and Ratcliffe and Turner and some of the others, every time they got the floor, first of all, I was quite pleased that Schiff did not stop them. I mean, he was a little bit kind of a nanny, but basically he did get in, to get in there and try to stop him. But the points that they were making were just, to me, were extremely relevant, and that is, there's really no influence. I mean, there's no evidence of anything. I mean, you got guys that never even met the president, and here we are talking, as Turner said, we're talking about trying to impeach him, and we're looking for evidence from people who never even met him, and you're the lead witnesses. So that's a pretty poor sign of the case of the. Everything they said today was just nothing but opinion and hearsay, and by the way, there was another little development in the Ergonon press session when they asked. One of the few things that came out today that was somewhat new was this idea that. They said that Taylor said that one of his colleagues told him that he had been taking the ambassador to the airport, and he had called the president, and he overheard the president say that it was going to be either do the inquiry and do it publicly and announce it publicly on the part of the president of Ukraine, or they weren't going to get any military aid. Well, they asked the president about that at that press conference, and he said he had no recollection of ever talking to the ambassador at that point, and never talked to him about that issue at all. So
yeah, it's not a high. I'm sorry, Larry.
Well,
go ahead.
It was he said, you said, you know.
Yeah. Well, we need to make sure that the audience and everyone in America realizes that you only impeach presidents for high crimes and misdemeanors, which is historically being doing things illegal or doing things wrong. Not from this, well, I was in the back of a car and I heard somebody say something. You have no idea what the context is about. I mean, I'm in cars with people all the time, and you hear part of a conversation and you assume it to be about something, but you're usually wrong. So did they actually witness the president doing something that was wrong for the American people? Let's see. What we know is that the president and the American people and Obama wanted to minimize the corruption going on in Ukraine. So we know corruption was a big problem. And the president said, you need to do everything you can to get corruption reduced, because he's thinking it about American tax dollars being spent there. We all should think about that. And for some reason, by taking that action, and if not, someone else was involved whose last name happens to be Biden, let the chips fall where they may. Just investigate it and release your report. And that's a problem. You know, I think this whole thing is going to backfire on Democrats. They're going to wish they never really went after Trump, because the difference between President Trump and prior Republicans, and I've been here since Reagan, is that President Trump isn't going to take it and lie down. When you hit him, he hits you back. So when Adam Schiff says something that's not correct and is not telling the truth, President Trump says he's a liar. Now, we haven't had that kind of interchange in Washington. In a way, it's disappointing that we're engaging in that, but he's just calling, I think, a spade, so to speak, or somebody who is fabricating evidence to account.
Well, it sounds like this guy that reported to Taylor was fabricating some evidence. It wasn't even evidence, but he was fabricating a narrative that in fact never happened.
Right. And
how would he know anyway? To your point,
that's
how
exactly
would he know
right.
anyway?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And if we know that he's even though he's in the State Department, if he's partisan, because everyone who works in government is partisan. There's no objective person just going to work every day. Everybody who's drawn to politics has a particular view of the world. Maybe you like Trump, maybe you don't like Trump. You want to be heard, maybe you're not being heard. Your ego gets involved, and then you want to be the big hero and try to bring a president down based upon nothing.
And it's not just your ego, and there's so many cases of people that started out in government making a very relatively modest salary and end up 20, 30 years later as multimillionaires, including some of our candidates for president.
Right.
Notably Clinton and Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
I mean that. And the other thing is, as Tom Donelson was saying, you know, what's worse, trying to find out if there really is some truth to the rumor that Biden was bragging about that involved his son. Is that really true or not? Is that worse or better than taking money, using the military allotment of money to the Ukrainians and telling them that they better get rid of a certain guy that's giving his son's company problems, or else you're not going to get any money for? I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, for the average, it doesn't really pass the smell test. You know, I'm sure the vice president's son is a good guy, but when you're put on a board and you're collecting $50,000 a month and you don't know anything about the subject, why are you put on the board? Well, we know the answer to that because your father's the vice president. The average American wouldn't get a call and say, hey, be on this Ukrainian board of energy and we'll pay you $50,000 a month. And I think that's part and parcel of why most people don't really trust or believe what's going on in Washington. It's too bad because we are the greatest country in the world. Our people all across America are so good and decent, and they do the right things, and they raise their children the right way. Yet in Washington, over time, we've evolved our government into being kind of less accountable to people. And you can do whatever you want, and then you put that in a climate of everyone wanting things and telling you how smart you are and how great you are and how wonderful you are. You come to believe it, and you lose touch. At least that's been my experience with a lot of elected officials in both parties.
How powerful
up and down.
you are.
Right, right.
And I mean, the power is kind of a
it's corrupting.
It not only absolute power.
I mean, I tell my students that like at the beginning, at the end of each class, I said, if you don't remember one thing about this class, remember this: power is corrupting. Absolute power is corrupting absolutely.
Well, we're going to step aside for a minute, and this is the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network.
Hello, this is Sandy Eason, the host of Sandy's Secrets. Come and join us, where we will be talking about women's issues of sexuality, sensuality, and self-love. We'll be coming soon, exclusively on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network, and we're talking to Dr. David Rare on the whole topic of, I guess it's the swamp.
Well, there's some good things, Larry. There are some people inside the swamp that are bad, but I always like to point out that we're the only country in the world that has a constitutional right for people to challenge their government. And I don't think we want to give that up. We just want to be sure that people are playing by the rules and they're not shortcutting the system based upon their last name or who they are or what they've done. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Picking up on your discussion of the Biden thing, I mean, I don't blame. I at least from what I know now, I don't blame the son for taking the job. It's only if his father starts using his elected post to support it, and to try to smooth the way.
Right.
But
right.
On the other hand, this guy also apparently got $1 billion from China, and so maybe he isn't so innocent.
Yeah. I don't know that much about the particular example, but it's hard when you're an elected official and you have children and they want to be involved in business as well, because you naturally think that people are trying to get to you to get to them to get to you. So you have to be a little wary. My father, when he was alive, used to tell me, often good things are too good to be true. And when somebody says, here's 50, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Yeah.
$50,000 a month, it's too good to be true when you don't know anything about the subject. It's too good to be true.
And they're saying it was probably more like $80,000 a month.
Yeah.
Well,
so I'm sorry. Getting back on topic. So the Democrats nationally can only beat Trump if they try to really destroy his reputation. I think that what they've been doing over the last 3 years is trying to break his supporters from him. So people will say, I can't vote for the president. The president is this, the president is that. I won't show up. I won't turn out. So there can be higher Democratic turnout while they're inflaming their own base, and there'll be lower Republican turnout. So for people who support kind of the goals of the president, they need to be sure they don't get discouraged by what they're hearing and seeing in Washington, because this is all like a phony show. And it's spending tax dollars to try to to campaign against the president.
Well, the other thing that is on the positive side of the president is these rallies. I mean, I am just astounded at how many people and how enthusiastic and how, I mean, when he gets in these and the job that he does, I mean, he's really funny. He speaks plain English, sometimes a little too plain, and it really is amazing. There's nobody I've ever that I can ever remember in my lifetime that had that kind of an appeal. And frankly, if he will, I'm sure, continue to do that, and then branch, that gives everybody a good sort of base in the campaign world to kind of branch out and do a lot of other things too. But that to me is his charisma is really quite astounding, I think.
Yeah, and he's like the Energizer Bunny because he just keeps going and 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 going. And he's off. Mostly, he has a script. He follows the script, but he also interjects personal things and comments that is relatable to people. And I think people really appreciate the authenticity of Donald Trump, whether you personally want him as your neighbor or not, or would you have your children see him or whatever it is. On a personal note, you look at a man who's just been relentlessly attacked day in and day out. I mean, I just heard on one of the radio networks, I guess yesterday or the day before, that Harvard had done a study on positive, negative media, and it's something like 130% negative against Trump. And like every day he's facing people just trying to destroy him. It doesn't really seem to take a toll on him. I mean, maybe in the privacy of his White House, he gets mad and uses bad language and stuff. But at least publicly, he just kind of rolls off his back and he keeps pursuing his agenda going forward, which is a good thing. And I think that drives his opponents crazy.
And the fact that he doesn't keep quiet either,
Right.
George Bush never fought back.
Right.
But well, let's move on to the other major event today, and that was the Erdogan visit to Washington, which just talk about driving the opponents crazy. That whole episode is just really astonishing. If it holds, I mean, what Trump has done by his negotiating is he has actually solved, at least he set in motion the solution to a problem that's been happening clearly since the end of World War I, and if you look at the sectarian conflict, it's been 1,000 years. I mean, more than 1,000 years. And then to have this and Erdogan being so, I mean, he's kind of a puzzlement, frankly. I don't know what to make of that guy. For a long time, everything we were hearing was bad. He was doing business with the Russians and buying military equipment from them, and he was persecuting the people because he was afraid they were going to be ISIS advocates, and now he comes out and he looks like a savior. So I don't know. What's your opinion of him?
Well, I think we need to be careful with him. I was in Turkey several years ago. His first years in office, he was a very good, very thoughtful leader. As he's been in there longer, like many leaders, I think he's a little bit more totalitarian.
Yeah.
Like he put a lot of journalists in jail, and he put a lot of people in colleges in jail, which he probably didn't need to do. So I think cautiously optimistic is the word, because Maybe he said the right thing. He did the right thing. He knows that if he takes President Trump on, I think President Trump sent out a tweet that said, if you don't stop the fighting there, we're just going to flatten you. And I think the one thing that people like about President Trump is that he says what he means. Maybe not in the most delicate sense all the time, but so you don't mess with him. And that we haven't had a president like that for a long time. Maybe Reagan was the last president we had like that. So I think that's refreshing. But, this will be one more thing in a year of campaign moments on what kind of president do you really want, America? A strong president or maybe someone who's not that strong.
But you want to talk about, we were talking earlier about the resistance and the kind of almost jealousy that the State Department has because they've lost control of the foreign policy. And boy, talk about this situation, this whole Syrian thing. I mean, it's just absolutely, he's done that without any real support from the State Department. I mean, the Secretary of State is in his camp, but he doesn't have anybody in the whole darn building that's really very sympathetic to him.
Yeah, the established bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Now, I have a bit of a bias because traditionally I kind of view, maybe I'm wrong, I try to be open-minded about this, but I view the State Department as a place that makes excuses for America. Always tells us, well, don't be too cocky, we're sorry about this, we're sorry about that, we're sorry that America was started in 1776, it became a country. We're just generally sorry and we just want to apologize. Where I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, my father was a first-generation American. We were taught, because they immigrated to this country, to love the country, that America stood for opportunity, and it was a place where people could come from anywhere in the world and, based upon their skill, move up the socioeconomic ladder. And I think that's right. I think that's true. So I'm like, we don't really have a lot to apologize for. And so I don't really view the world the same way that your typical State Department person does. I know it's simplistic. So I would say that combined with this, what I see constantly in D.C. of this kind of elite class of people because they went to certain schools, they think they know everything about everything. Well, that may not be true. And let's put a little common sense and regular people in so they can give you some practical examples of how the world works. Not just things that you learn in textbooks, even though I'm a professor, and I think the world will be a lot better off. And I think a lot of people at the State Department don't like that because it threatens their power and their influence.
We sure have a president who doesn't apologize for America.
Right. I'm sorry, Larry. I had a guy who used to, I won't mention his name, but I had a guy who used to work for President Trump come to speak to one of my groups. And he showed a picture of him and the president was standing there holding the mic. And he looked at me and I said, what is it really like to work for the president? And he said, number one, I'm standing on the same level on the podium as the president. No one's ever done that before. The president always stands higher than everybody else. Number two, the president's holding the microphone. The president never holds the microphone. And he said that Trump is not kind of into all of the orchestration of what the president should be like. He just wants to get things done.
Yeah.
And I think we see that. And that rubs some people the wrong way.
A lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, in business, you have to live by results because you can't fool the financial statement, and you can't. It's all whatever it is. It's known. So.
The other classic story I heard, and guys, your audience might not know this. They may know this, but the other classic story I heard is people from the different agencies, departments come to see the president, and they'll brief him on something, and he'll ask him a question, and they'll say, "Mr. President, we can't do that." And he looks at him and he says, "How many people work with you?" 3,000, let's say. Pick a number, 3,000. We have 3,000 people who work there, and no one can find out how to solve this problem. You go back to your department, and you send people over here who know the answer. And it's not the same old, well, we just won't get around to it, we just won't do it, we'll just keep things going the way they've been going for the last decade. He's very much of a get the solution, let's solve the problem, and then let's move on and make things better for the American people.
Well, you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network.
If you want to hear another view of the latest developments in Trump's Washington, listen to the Dr. Larry Show. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Larry is a former businessman, entrepreneur, college president, and author who provides background and context for current events and trends in politics, education, foreign policy, and religion from a conservative perspective. Tune in and hear the other side as Dr. Larry talks with Washington insiders exclusively on blogtalkradio.com and the podcast at thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
Well, you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network. I think I'm going to have to meet that Dr. Larry. If he was as good as that commercial, I think he's somebody I ought to know.
Yeah, I think he's 8 feet tall too. Yeah.
Well, we were talking about the State Department. You've got a lot of that attitude in the various departments in government, including the Department of Defense. In fact, we lost the first Secretary of Defense precisely because he couldn't go along with Trump's his approach to war. You know, he doesn't like it. He wants to get rid of it and get the boys home and try to negotiate his way around the world. And Mathis just couldn't stand that. And frankly, the current chief of the Joint Chiefs, what do they call him? The head of the Joint Chiefs.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's also of the same opinion. I mean, he doesn't like the idea of withdrawing all our troops. But Trump is showing that you can do it and actually leave things better off than they were.
Yeah.
We'll see what he does in Afghanistan, but there's a lot of that attitude that we know how to run things, and these elected people are just come in for a little while and then they leave. Of course, that's not true in the Congress, but it sure is in the presidency by law.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the government has gotten so big that there's lots of little bureaucracies and a lot of fiefdoms out there that people just can be the head of. And when you disrupt that and there's like motion, people don't really like change. My wife tells me that all the time, that people don't like change, and she's right. But if you're making change which you think is going to bring a better prosperity for tomorrow, take the chance, do it. We only live once, so let's try to be the best we can be and make the country the best it can be. But it's going to result in a few people being in different seats.
Well, it's not. It's a double reward. It's in many cases. It's not only power. Now, the Department of Defense probably it is mostly power, but it's also financial. Because a lot of people are, and I saw this on the contractor side. A lot of people making money making big money on having these, on getting into these fiefdoms, whether you're from the outside coming in or the inside going out. It's very seductive, and I was going to. What do you know about Deval Patrick?
He's the kind of typical liberal Democrat governor of Massachusetts. He may have had some legislative successes. I'm not really familiar with them, but I don't think he's, other than in the Northeast, is well known by the rest of the Democrats in the country. And I'm not sure his policies in Massachusetts will work well in Iowa or in Wisconsin or in North Carolina or in Florida or Texas.
Who do you think is going to get the nomination?
I think it's going to end up being Elizabeth Warren, and there's going to be a panic in the Democratic Party. I mean, she's very passionate. I give her credit for being very authentic. She basically says what she thinks, but what she says and what she thinks is going to be very costly to most Americans, and that's a problem that they're going to have to come to grips with. But I would give her probably the outside chance if Biden doesn't prevail. You know, there's going to be an effort to try to stop her, either with new candidates. Mrs. Clinton will likely be urged to get in the race if it's going to be Elizabeth Warren, just to stop her, and then she can run again. And kind of the whole campaign can be about show up and vote for me so I can beat Donald Trump this time, and I didn't beat him last time. But I think it's going to be hard. You know, the country continues to be prosperous, and the one thing we really haven't heard on the Democratic side, and this really isn't their forte, is what are the economic policies they're going to improve or change to make America's economy even better. And there really isn't any, other than we're going to have more unions, we're going to have higher minimum wages and put small business people out of business. We're going to take money from one sector and give it to another sector. When I think the ultimate answer for the Democrats is kind of the John Kennedy, neo-John Kennedyism that was like, let's figure out a way how we can create more economic growth so everybody benefits.
Yeah, but if he were alive today, he'd probably be a Republican.
Yeah, that's what people say. I'm not sure because, you know, Democrat history runs deep in his family, and we have a lot of people around the country who maybe they vote Republican or think Republican, but view the Republicans oddly like they can never be one of them.
Well, in a lot of ways, Bill Clinton, when he was running against Dole, you couldn't tell who was a Republican.
Right. Clinton was smart. I mean, you have to give him this. For all of his foibles, he knew politics. I mean, I had the chance of meeting him several times, and when you were locked into a conversation with him, you'd do anything he wanted. He just had this magnetism that, like, was an attraction, linked on you, and you go, yes, Mr. President, of course, Mr. President. I watched him once. I introduced him once, and he gave a speech, and he brought with him a note card that had 4 words on it, and he gave a 45-minute flawless speech, which was moving.
Isn't that the way you do your lectures?
Right. No. I take breaks. I have slides. I'm lucky to get through a few sentences. So he was a master at that, but I'm not sure that the Democrats have anybody who can speak to that same level of kind of acceptance and conversion that he had.
Well, Trump is probably the best. He's certainly the best politician on the scene these days.
Right.
In spite of the fact that he is not a politician by training.
Right.
Well.
Although, Dr. Larry, I know we're running out of time, but for those of you who have Netflix, there was a Netflix special on Donald Trump, which I watched the other day, and at the end of the first episode, the interviewer in New York says, have you ever thought about becoming president? And he said, no, I don't think so, but I was thinking, yeah, what were you really thinking? And that was 20 years ago.
My gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming to the end of our discussion here, and do you have any final thoughts or any pet projects that you would like to tell the audience about?
Well, yeah. First off, I launched a podcast. Dr. Larry has a great podcast, which I listen to. But if you're interested in more inside kind of political congressional information, I just interviewed a member of Congress today who gave up his position to Jim Jordan on the House Intelligence Committee. It was a great interview. It's called Advocacy and Influence. It's on all of the podcast platforms, so sign up. You can subscribe, and if you don't like it, don't subscribe. Send me an email, at drare@gmu.edu and say it was awful. I'll never listen to Dr. Larry's show when you're on as a guest again. But I think you'll like it. I think you'll like it. And then I think the whole movement that we need to foster among people is to have our government become more accountable and transparent. And you and I have talked a little bit about this before, but I think that there's a dramatic lack of transparency on where government spending goes and how do we measure whether we're successful at it. We're not a country that can just spend millions of dollars and not get results. So what can we do to keep everybody accountable and keep everybody transparent?
Well, on that note, I want to say good night, and we thank you for coming. And
thank you for having me.
This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network, and we wish everybody a happy the rest of the week, and God bless America.